Hello, and thank you for joining our security awareness training today. We will be going over the 2025 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. They issue this every year, and so we'll just be going over the main takeaways from it. So today we will just go over the main kind of points that the report covers, the different risks, different vulnerabilities, what's specific to different industries, and what we can do about it. All right, so at an overview here, this was a record-breaking year for this report. There were over 22,000 incidents, which is the highest in the 18-year history of this report being issued. Of those 22,000, over 12,000 were confirmed breaches. And just to clarify the difference between those two, an incident is an event where there's some sort of compromise of integrity, confidentiality, or availability of systems or data. Whereas a breach is a confirmed incident that results in disclosure of data, not just potential. So this was worldwide, happened across 139 countries. The main areas that it kind of delves into, which we will as well, were ransomware, third party, so vendor risks, AI, as well as vulnerability and exploitation of those vulnerabilities. And the report uses the Veris framework to kind of understand and conceptualize attacks. So it has just like a kind of standardized way of looking at the threat actors, threat actions, the assets involved, and the different attributes of the attack that kind of make them more unique. So moving along here, we have our key threat trends. So, we've heard this one before, and it's that people are the first line of defense, and they're also the main reason for these breaches. So 60% of the breaches in this year's report were did involve a human. So the majority of those human-related breaches did involve some sort of like stolen credentials, misdelivery errors, which I looked into that, and that is where credentials are sent to the wrong person. So if you're trying to send your employee their new log-on password, you send it to the wrong person, and boom, that person has now a very convenient way of getting into your system. And then phishing schemes, of course. We all see those quite often. Also, ransomware, that went up from 32% of breaches last year to 44% this year. Small organizations were hit the hardest. 88% of their breaches did involve ransomware in some form or another, which is a huge percentage. That said, while there is an increase in ransomware, the median ransom paid did drop down to 115,000, and 64% of folks did refuse to pay. So that's going down. So we'll see if, in the future, that hopefully prevents this from being such a desirable method or goal for attackers. Exploitation of vulnerabilities. This they did account for 20% of the initial breach access, which is up 34%. Edge devices, which can be any sort of device that is at the edge of a network. So that could be any sort of like smart device, like a smart camera, like a little controller. It could be a router, basically, again, anything that sits at the edge of the network. Those, as well as VPNs, were the most targeted. The targets on those edge devices, there was a huge increase on the attacks on those specifically. So really something to pay attention there as far as protections and controls around those edge devices. And then speaking of those are vulnerabilities, and they should be patched, and so important to have good patch management processes in place. And speaking of those processes, the median patch time was 32 days, with only 54% of them fully remediated. Um, so that's again median. So there are plenty that went past that 32-day point. There are some that were quicker than that, but still that's considerable amount of time, considering how prevalent these attacks are on these devices. So third party and supply chain risks. Um, more and more companies rely on third parties to either process, store their data. In a lot of cases, it's a critical dependency. So there are 30% of the breaches this year did involve a third party. So that's, a huge percentage that is doubled from last year. It was 15% before. One of the case studies in the report is concerning Snowflake, where they did have MFA involved in some of their login platforms. However, it wasn't implemented across the board. So attackers were able to determine where MFA wasn't required, and they were able to capture credentials that were either, we'll probably never know, but that might have been through some sort of targeted breach, or it could have just been they purchased the credentials through like an access broker. Either way, they were able to use those credentials in combination with the lack of MFA, and boom, they were able to get in. They had over 100 employees that were impacted, and tons of organizations do rely on Snowflake quite critically. So just really important to think about these dependencies that organizations have, and think about the impact to your organization, and make sure that you have proper policies and processes around vendor management. So, good onboarding, checking what controls they have in place, and making sure that's an ongoing process as well. So it's not one and done. It's every year, or more often than that, making sure that their security practices are functioning as expected and that they're in line with your organization's needs. All right, so then moving on here, kind of touched on it a bit, but credential and secrets exposure. So lots of ransomware, and 54% of those ransomware victims did have credentials leaked beforehand. So like we were talking about earlier, an access broker is a potential initial kind of attack vector. So these bad actors are, in some cases, not always, but in some cases, getting these stolen credentials through an access broker, where they're just kind of compiling all of these credentials and selling them to the folks that need them and want them. 46% of stolen credentials came from unmanaged personal devices. So devices that were accessing sensitive data, but weren't being managed by the company. So if you have employees on your team that use their cell phone to access data in one form or another, but you don't have any sort of mobile device management app or any sort of kind of oversight over those personal devices, that's a huge attack vector that bad actors love to take advantage of. Moving on from just straight up, login and password, a huge problem is the amount of credentials that are stored in code. So like in public code repositories like GitHub, for example. In some cases, it can be required that there's some amount of credentials hard-coded, but really important to minimize that as much as possible. The median time to fix the code that had hard-coded credentials in it was 94 days, which is a very long time. Credential reuse is also a huge problem. So that also contributes to these credentials being used in code and the amount of time that it takes to remediate. And for the most part, So there were over 400,000 secrets found in these public repositories. They're mostly JSON web tokens and then Google Cloud API keys. Um, but either way, just super critical to keep those out as much as possible. And just overall, there's just a huge kind of emphasis on having good BYOD, so bring your own device policies. So again, having good mobile device management, oversight over that, MFA across the board, and then good secrets management, which is again in regards to the hard-coded credentials. Moving on into AI, which we've been hearing a ton about, of course, but not for no reason. It's becoming so prevalent. We're using it more and more. And while it's super helpful, it does provide a huge new attack vector, a new frontier for risk. Employees can inadvertently upload sensitive data into AI platforms. So really critical that organizations have strong policies, strong education around how to use AI, because 15% of employees did access AI platforms from their corporate devices, which isn't inherently a problem, but there does need to be, again, governance around that. The more concerning piece is that 72% of those employees did use personal emails to use the AI. So, excuse me, if they're using those accounts, they're putting sensitive data into those AI models. Um, Very likely that it's not protected up to company standards. And then of those that did use corporate emails, there were 17% that didn't have proper SSO in place, so easier for attackers to access those accounts, gain whatever data that was put into them. So again, just really critical to train, to have proper policies, guidelines, limitations on AI usage can be a huge help to the organization, but again, it does provide just a whole new frontier for problems. And we have some industry-specific risks. Healthcare was the most targeted among the industries, with medical data being the most frequently compromised sensitive data type. Retail and finance, payment breaches were down to just 1% of the data types breach, which is a drop. So hopefully that's, a good indication. And in the public sector, there was an increase in espionage, be that state-sponsored or competitor. Espionage related or motivated breaches increased by 163% in this report. So definitely something to be aware of. All right, and so what can we do about this? Having proper patching management processes in place is super critical. These vulnerabilities exist. There's always going to be vulnerabilities, so staying on top of them, having proper governance around categorization, prioritization, all of that of the different vulnerabilities and how you're going to approach patching them is critical. Really important to have MFA across the organization. MFA is very useful, but if you don't use it everywhere, you're significantly reducing the impact that it can have. There's all these stolen credentials everywhere, credential reuse, but MFA really does provide you with that second layer of defense that is really, really critical. Again, having strong policies about how to use AI, when it's appropriate, how to use it, what to put in it. And then just adopting least privilege, so making sure that people's access is appropriate to their role, that they don't have additional permissions that they don't need, or some sort of conflict of duties within what they're allotted. And having strong network segmentation is also very important, so that if one of these attacks does take place, an attacker isn't able to easily move laterally across the network and cause more harm than they could otherwise. And these are just some quick resources. So just the report as well as the various framework, which we talked at the beginning, which just kind of helps conceptualize these attacks. And thank you very much for attending. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks.